You believe you know the Middle Ages, don't you? You picture knights in shining armor, pious kings, and monks cloistered away, silently copying ancient texts. But what if we told you that hidden within the dusty annals of Francia, a forgotten rebellion festered? A rebellion led not by a disillusioned noble, but by a man of God, a monk who dared to challenge the divine right of kings, sparking an uprising that history has painstakingly tried to erase. Welcome, true co-explorers, to Medieval Times Uncharted, where we peel back the layers of convenient narratives to reveal the raw, pulsating truth beneath. Today, you are invited to step into the shadow-draped corridors of 9th-century Francia, a land fractured by ambition and veiled in the shifting mists of power. You will journey with us to unearth the legend of Brother Elias, the rogue monk whose defiance threatened to unravel the very fabric of royal authority. This is a story they didn't want you to know, a chapter deliberately omitted, because Brother Elias possessed a secret weapon, one that could dismantle kingdoms from within. If you believe history deserves to be truly explored, not just recited, then hit that like button to fuel our research. Subscribe to the Medieval Times Uncharted channel so you never miss a revelation. And follow us across all platforms to become a true co-explorer of the forgotten past. Imagine, if you will, the Kingdom of Francia in the early 9th century. The colossal shadow of Charlemagne still loomed, but his empire, once a beacon of unity, was fracturing. You feel the chill winds of discontent blowing across the vast lands, rustling through the wheat fields and echoing in the cold stone halls of power. Kings, burdened by inherited crowns and warring siblings, struggled to maintain control. Their authority, though proclaimed divine, often felt fragile, a thin veneer over a simmering cauldron of feudal ambition. In this tumultuous landscape, where the sword was often the ultimate arbiter of justice, the Church remained a powerful, yet often compliant, ally to the crown. Monasteries, scattered like quiet islands across the realm, were seen as bastions of piety, learning, and above all, obedience. You might envision their inhabitants as humble servants, their lives dedicated to prayer, study, and the quiet service of God and King. But not all who wore the cowl were content with silent contemplation. Some possessed minds that saw beyond the stained glass windows, hearts that beat with an unyielding sense of justice. One such soul was Brother Elias. His story begins not with a roar, but with a whisper, a silent dissent brewing in the hallowed halls of a Benedictine monastery. You see him, a man of medium stature, perhaps in his late 30s, his eyes sharp and unusually bright behind the severity of his monk's habit. His hands, though calloused from years of copying manuscripts, also possessed a strength, a subtle tremor that hinted at a deeper fire within. He was known for his rigorous studies, his deep understanding of Scripture, and an almost unsettling ability to dissect complex theological arguments. You feel the weight of countless ancient texts pressing down on him, not as a burden, but as a source of immense power, knowledge that few others possessed. Elias witnessed the growing chasm between the ideals of Christian kingship and the stark, often brutal realities of royal power. He saw the suffering of the peasantry, crushed by heavy taxes and the endless demands of warring lords, often sanctioned by royal decree. He heard the cries of injustice, echoing beyond the monastery walls, and felt them resonate within his very soul. The words of the prophets, the teachings of the early church fathers, they burned in his mind, starkly contrasting with the opulent lives of the ruling elite. You can almost smell the damp earth of the monastery garden, the scent of parchment and beeswax, but beneath it, the faint whiff of desperation from the common folk. Initially, Elias channeled his discontent into fervent prayer and intense scholarly debate within the monastery. He sought answers in ancient texts, meticulously highlighting passages that spoke of justice, righteousness, and the moral obligations of rulers. But the answers he found, rather than bringing solace, only deepened his conviction that something was profoundly wrong. The kings of Francia, he concluded, were straying far from the path of true Christian leadership. They had become tyrants, cloaked in sacred legitimacy. You watch as his quiet contemplation slowly transforms into a burning resolve. The scholar became a reluctant revolutionary. His brethren noticed the change, the intensity in his gaze, the quiet ferocity in his debates, but they dismissed it as scholarly zeal, perhaps a touch of monastic eccentricity. They couldn't know that Elias was forging a different kind of weapon, not of steel, but of conviction, honed by scripture and fueled by injustice. The turning point arrived with a royal decree, a particularly egregious act of confiscation and oppression against a local community near Elias's monastery. You hear the villagers' cries, the desperate pleas of families stripped of their livelihoods, their lands seized to fund another royal campaign. This act, sanctioned by the king and implicitly accepted by the church, shattered Elias's remaining illusion of silent obedience. He saw it not as a political maneuver but as a grave sin, a betrayal of the divine covenant between ruler and ruled. It was then that Brother Elias decided to step out from the shadows of his cloistered world. His rebellion would be unlike any seen before. He began, subtly at first, weaving his critiques into his sermons to the local populace, who were permitted to attend services at the monastery. You see the faces in the crowd, weary and resigned, slowly begin to stir as Elias speaks. His words, delivered with quiet passion, resonated deeply. He didn't preach open rebellion initially. He preached justice, righteousness, and the true meaning of Christian leadership, directly quoting scriptures that undermined the king's current actions. His words were a balm to the suffering, but also a spark to the embers of resentment. He spoke of accountability, even for those who wore the crown. Soon, whispers began to circulate beyond the monastery gates. Whispers of a monk who dared to speak truth to power. People traveled from neighboring villages, drawn by the hope in his voice, the defiance in his message. You feel the growing tension, the subtle shift in the air as hope and defiance replace resignation. Elias began to hold clandestine meetings under the cloak of night, in hidden forest clearings or abandoned barns. You watch as a motley crew gathers, desperate peasants, disgruntled minor nobles, even a few disillusioned local clergy. To them, Elias wasn't just a monk. He was a prophet, a beacon of hope against an oppressive tide. But what was his secret weapon? How could a lone monk, armed only with scripture, challenge the might of a king and his armies? Elias's genius lay not in military strategy, but in something far more insidious and effective against a divinely appointed ruler: the systematic undermining of royal legitimacy through rhetoric and scriptural interpretation. He understood that a king's power in Francia wasn't just physical, it was deeply spiritual, rooted in the belief that God had chosen him to rule. You realize this is the true battlefield, not the muddy fields of war, but the hearts and minds of the people, the very foundation of belief. His secret weapon was a meticulously crafted theological argument, distilled from obscure biblical commentaries and forgotten patristic writings. He argued that a king who failed in his divine obligations to protect the weak, uphold justice, and live righteously, forfeited his divine right to rule. You imagine the shock, the revolutionary tremor this idea sent through a populace taught absolute obedience. He articulated that God's covenant was with the righteous ruler, not merely with the bloodline. If the ruler broke that covenant, the people were not bound to obey. This was explosive. This was treason, wrapped in the sacred language of faith. Elias didn't call for regicide. He called for divine judgment, manifested through the righteous action of the people. His followers, dubbed the Brotherhood of the Righteous Covenant, began to spread this message like wildfire. You see them, traveling secretly from village to village, cloaked figures whispering Elias's words in hushed tones around campfires and in market squares. They carried not swords, but carefully copied fragments of Elias's sermons, disguised as devotional texts. This was the true uncharted aspect of Elias's rebellion, a widespread ideological insurgency, decentralized and deeply spiritual, operating beneath the radar of conventional intelligence. The king, initially dismissive of some troublesome monk, began to hear disturbing reports. His tax collectors found increasingly resistant villagers. His local officials reported a new, unsettling defiance in the eyes of the common folk. You feel the king's growing frustration, his bewilderment at a rebellion that had no visible army, no clear leader he could simply capture and execute. The whispers began to reach the royal court. The monk says God is not with the king. This was far more dangerous than any armed uprising. It was an assault on the very soul of his rule. Royal spies infiltrated villages, trying to identify the source, to unmask the ringleaders of this insidious brotherhood. But the network was too diffuse, too rooted in shared belief and clandestine whispers. Elias had taught his followers discretion and coded communication. You observe the ingenuity, seemingly innocuous phrases in daily greetings, specific knots in rosaries, patterns in planted fields, all served as signals. The king ordered Elias's arrest. Royal guards stormed his monastery, expecting to find a defiant figurehead. But Elias, forewarned by his network, had vanished. He became a phantom, a living legend, his disappearance only fueling the mystique. His flight was not a defeat, but a tactical retreat, allowing him to become a symbol, a voice from the wilderness. He continued to issue pronouncements, smuggled out through his network, now from unknown locations, further enhancing his aura of invincibility. The rebellion escalated. Peasants refused to pay tithes to the church and taxes to the crown, citing Elias's theological justifications. You witness the audacity of their refusal, the quiet strength born of a newfound conviction. Minor nobles, emboldened by the weakening of royal authority and Elias's legitimizing arguments, began to assert more independence. The fabric of Francia, stretched thin by internal conflicts, now truly began to fray under the pressure of this spiritual insurgency. The king, desperate, turned to the powerful bishops and abbots, demanding they condemn Elias and reaffirm royal authority. But even within the church, Elias's arguments had found fertile ground among some who secretly harbored similar criticisms of royal corruption. You sense the moral dilemma within the church. Condemn a man who spoke uncomfortable truths, or risk appearing to sanction tyranny? The official condemnation came, harsh and unequivocal, but it lacked the universal conviction the king needed. It merely drove more moderate dissenters into the arms of Elias's brotherhood. The king's armies were strong, but how do you fight an idea? How do you suppress a belief that has taken root in the hearts of thousands? You watch as royal garrisons found themselves surrounded by hostile, uncooperative populations, their supplies mysteriously vanishing, their messengers intercepted. There were no pitched battles, no grand sieges, but a slow, suffocating erosion of royal control. Elias's rebellion was a war of wills, a battle for the very soul of Francia, fought with parchment, sermon, and unwavering faith. The kingdom teetered on the brink of widespread civil unrest, not instigated by rival dukes, but by a monk and his theological secret weapon. The climax arrived not in a bloody confrontation, but in a crisis of faith and governance that forced the king to make a profound choice. Faced with dwindling revenues, increasing unrest, and the subtle but potent threat of a fragmented church, the king was forced to concede. He issued a series of sweeping reforms, curbing the excesses of his nobles, lowering taxes, and promising greater accountability. You see the grudging nature of his concessions, born not of benevolence, but of stark necessity. He did not explicitly acknowledge Elias, but the reforms were a direct response to the monk's profound challenge to his legitimacy. Brother Elias himself, after achieving his goal, disappeared from recorded history. His fate remains one of the greatest mysteries of this uncharted rebellion. Did he live out his days in quiet contemplation, satisfied that he had forced a king to bend? Or was he eventually captured and executed in secret, his memory systematically expunged by a humiliated crown? You feel the lingering echo of his defiance, a testament to the power of belief against overwhelming authority. The official histories of Francia conveniently gloss over this period of ideological turmoil, focusing instead on dynastic squabbles or foreign wars. The story of Brother Elias and his Brotherhood of the Righteous Covenant was effectively purged, deemed too dangerous, too subversive, to remain in the collective memory. Why? Because his secret weapon, the idea that kings derived their authority not just from God, but from their actions, was a revolutionary concept. It was a precedent that no monarch wanted to acknowledge, a blueprint for future defiance. They couldn't allow the common folk to remember that a monk, through sheer theological will, had forced a king to reconsider the very nature of his rule. You realize that history, as we are taught it, is often a carefully curated narrative, designed to uphold existing power structures. But the spirit of Brother Elias, and countless others like him, continues to whisper from the shadows, reminding us that even the most formidable authorities can be challenged. His uncharted rebellion, fought with words and faith, left a subtle but indelible mark on the political and spiritual landscape of Francia. It proved that sometimes the greatest weapons are not forged in steel, but in the crucible of conviction, wielded by those who dare to question. The tale of Brother Elias challenges you to look beyond the grand narratives, to question what you've been told, and to seek out the quiet acts of courage that often shape our world in unseen ways. What other uncharted rebellions lie buried beneath the sands of time? What other forgotten figures possessed a secret weapon that changed history, only to be erased? The journey of discovery is far from over. There are countless other unseen empires waiting to be unearthed, and we can only do it together. If you believe history deserves to be truly explored, not just recited, then join our expedition. Hit that like button to fuel our research. Subscribe to the Medieval Times Uncharted channel so you never miss a revelation. And follow us across all platforms to become a true co-explorer of the forgotten past. Until next time, keep seeking the truth in the shadows of history.